Tonight, an important story for our region. First responders pushing Congress to extend the act that provides health care to people who work down at Ground Zero as the rubble still burns. We're going to talk to a guy who worked there himself and is now dedicating his life to helping other people who did the same and are suffering, in many cases, life-threatening illnesses. Then big changes. They could be coming to Rye Playland, and right now it is the only county-owned amusement park in the entire country. But that hopefully will change, and it could be changing soon. We're going to tell you all the implications it'll bring. Also, drama at East Ramapo. Will Albany pass a bill that puts a state monitor finally into the school district? Republicans and Democrats still fighting over it and trying to cut a deal. We'll tell you where we stand tonight. Good evening and welcome to RFL. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I'm Richard French. Well, we begin this evening with a head scratcher. Somebody out there explain to me how this makes sense for America. Why would Congress, why wouldn't they automatically extend the Zadroga Act? If you remember, that's the law that gives medical treatment and screenings to first responders who went down to Ground Zero immediately after 9/11. Bad enough it took nearly 10 years to pass it, and an estimated 1,000 firefighters who worked at Ground Zero have been diagnosed with some form of cancer. More than 100 have died from illnesses as a result of 9/11, that according to the deputy chief. And that doesn't even include the NYPD and other rescue workers who went down there to help. And the stakes, they could not be higher. Take a listen to what NYPD officer David Hawley had to say.
People are going to die. The men and women that are sick, that are being taken care of now, I've only been cancer-free a little over a year.
Hawley is one of the first responders who went to Washington last week to speak at a congressional hearing about the Zadroga Act. The money, it is set to run out this October, and now supporters want to extend it indefinitely. Firefighters from across the 5 boroughs also took buses down to the Capitol to show their support. But this is not just a New York story, far from it. Congressman Feal Upton of Michigan says it impacts people everywhere.
From 429 of the 435 congressional districts, the bill needs to be passed.
And my first guest is John Feal, president of the Feal Good Foundation. Its group's mission is to help first responders. And John, personally attached to this issue, he also worked at Ground Zero soon after the attacks, and he's kind enough to join me now. And you've been very kind over the years, not just how passionate you are about the mission, but explaining to the folks who didn't lose loved ones or didn't have folks who worked on the pile how the fight didn't end once the rubble was cleared and how people impacted. The part I don't get is, of the 435 members of Congress, something like 420-something of them came down to Ground Zero. I don't know a person, after they see it and the scope of it, that doesn't walk away, with a jaw somewhere around their feet. How could so many of these guys go back to Washington after seeing it and fight for so long, whether it be for Zadroga funding, just funding overall for New York, or even the interoperability for the radio? That's the part I don't get, and you've been to D.C. too many times to count now. How is it they can walk away after seeing it and still go back and say, sorry, I'm not going to make the funding available?
Well, one, thank you for having me. I'm humbled. Most people around the country, they remember 9/11 as 2 buildings coming down and 2,751 innocent lives lost to senseless violence. Later that afternoon, another building did come down. And since then, about 1,700 people have died from 9/11 related illnesses. Over 70,000 people now are enrolled in a World Trade Center health program, getting treated for their 9/11 related illnesses. 429 out of 435 congressional districts were represented during the 10-month cleanup at Ground Zero. Somebody from every state came to New York and helped. So during our darkest hours as a nation, the American spirit shined and rise to the occasion and brought hope to this country. But it's hard to wrap your arms around it, and it's hard to digest and articulate why 14 years later we're still fighting for those who are sick and suffering, those who have debilitating illnesses. Right now, NIOSH, who administrates the healthcare side of the James Zadroga Health and Compensation Act, has certified over 3,800 9/11 related cancers. Just imagine how many they haven't certified. I built a park on Long Island. We have almost 600 names on our wall now. We're slowly catching up to that 1,700 that have passed away. But I've never seen so much pain and suffering, and I can't imagine what Vietnam veterans came home, what they had to go through. But in my generation, before 9/11, I went to one funeral for my grandfather. And I've been now to 144 funerals. I've never seen so many people suffer. And
well, do me a favor, Feal, because I want you to put a human face on this for some
Sure.
folks. Greg Quibell, talk about who he was and
Sure.
what he went through.
Greg Quibell was a United States Marshal, and Greg died painfully from leukemia because of his 9/11 illnesses. And Greg, you know, I've helped tens of thousands of people since 9/11, and he was one of that handful of people that I got close to. And when Greg passed away, I was holding his hand. And I was in a room filled with his family. Many of them I didn't know. And Greg's last words were, "John, make sure my family's taken care of." And the weight on my shoulders for that is amazing. And his family is doing better. And like many others, though, they're waiting for their Victims' Compensation Fund, which is the compensation part of the James Zadroga Health and Compensation Act. And there's 18,000 claims on that. And about 5,000 people have been awarded their claims now. So, but Greg, like a lot of others, and John McNamara, the firefighter, who I am now really close with, his widow and his son Jack, these stories are heart-wrenching. And the pressure to keep producing, keep performing 14 years later, you know, my story pales in comparison to those up here in Rye, up in Westchester County, or on Long Island, or New York City. I lost half of my foot, and yet I feel blessed. I spent 11 weeks in the hospital with gangrene. I almost died, but yet I have my health. I'm here talking to you. But there are so many who are sick and suffering. Some of them are taking 30 medications a day.
We'll talk about Michael McPhillips, stage 4 cancer, right?
Michael's a Feal Good Foundation board member, and Michael's job is to take phone calls and emails from people who need help. But Michael himself, stage 4 liver failure, severe respiratory problems, post-traumatic. Michael not only goes back and forth to D.C. with me, with all his medications, and all of the 9/11 responders who go to D.C. with me are sick with all of their medications. I get too much credit because I take these 12, 15, 20 men with me, and I'm taking them away from their families. I'm taking them away from their household where they feel safe, but yet they're advocating for tens of thousands of people that need this bill renewed. And Michael gets on a plane with me once a month to travel around the country to bring people into the program. There's a national program. If you're in Oregon or Texas or Minnesota, you can get help. And these people, not only do they deserve the credit of being called a hero on 9/11 and the days after, but they're heroes still, 14 years later.
It was obviously unprecedented what happened to us on 9/11. I remember, and I spoke to then the head of the EPA, Christy Todd Whitman. She said in the days after the air was safe to breathe down there. They were wrong, obviously. They made mistakes. But the part that is shocking for a lot of people is, all right, we made mistakes, but at least let's do right by these folks who we asked to help. And I think there's a perception out there, and I think by telling the stories of the men you did, it may change some minds or at least educate some, but people aren't okay afterwards. It's not like there were some that were sick. There are people sick to this day that you're still trying to get the care for. And come October of this year, it expires and funding runs out next year, right?
Correct.
Just talk about how critical this window of time is for Washington to do the right thing.
You know, I'll say this, and I've said it a million times. Our nation's leaders, our elected officials in D.C., have a moral responsibility. Their first priority is to serve and protect their constituents, and many of them failed at that. We're ahead of the curve of where we were in 2010 when we got the bill passed. We have 86 co-sponsors now in the House and 19 in the Senate. People are getting it. We were going on human emotions and telling our stories back in 2010, 9, 8, 7, 6, and 5. Now we have statistics and facts. So when we go to a Senate member in North Carolina or a Congress member in North Carolina, there's 547 people in the program in North Carolina. There's 1,044 in Pennsylvania. There's 2,183 in Florida. There's 505 in California. There's 171 in Illinois. I have this memorized. And sadly, I'm not proud of that. I have it memorized how many people around the country are sick. And members of Congress and the Senate have a moral responsibility and an obligation to ensure that this bill gets renewed, but not for 5 years, not for 10 years, but permanently. So if you take the average age of the 9/11 responder on 9/11, they were 39 years old. They're now 52, 53, 54 on average. 25 years brings them to their average life expectancy of 78. We can at least give them 25 years if we're not going to permanently extend this bill. So when this bill expires this year and runs out of money next year, their illnesses don't expire with that. These people are going to get sicker and sicker. And with old age, these illnesses are going to become more debilitating. So in the hearing last week in D.C., there was a police officer that testified, and the Congress member asked him what will happen if the bill doesn't get renewed. And he said people will die. And he's partly right. The answer should have been more people are going to die, because even if we get the bill renewed, people are still going to die. The bill doesn't cure cancer.
Right.
The bill doesn't cure pulmonary fibrosis. And it doesn't cure post-traumatic from people committing suicide 14 years later. But we can at least ease their pain and ease their suffering and make sure that they have a roof over their head and food on their table and able to pay their utilities. I'll take Ray Pfeiffer, stage 4 cancer, a 9/11 hero. He's had his leg literally almost removed and steel rods put in there, and his ribs, because cancer has eaten away at his body. His medication is $30,000 a month. If this bill does not get renewed, Ray Pfeiffer would die immediately because he cannot afford $30,000 a month. That's how imperative. You need to sense the urgency. You need to read these emails and these phone calls that we get every day. It's that easy. You know, you go to D.C. and sometimes you're talking to their staffers, not the congressmen and the senator themselves, and they're 21, 22, 23 years old. They were in middle school when 9/11 happened. They don't appreciate the magnitude and the landscape of the devastation that 9/11 caused. Innocent lives were lost on 9/11, but people are still dying.
You think they get it? You think it is going to pass?
No, I'm 100%. I'm 100% sure it's going to pass. It's just a matter of, again, how long are they going to extend it for? And you know, listen, as long as I have a breath and as long as I'm able to fight, we're going to do whatever it takes. We almost got arrested in D.C. the day before the bill got passed in 2010, and we're prepared to almost get arrested again. And not saying that proudly, but at what point won't you do something for human life? We're talking about human beings. We're not talking about automobiles that got bailed out. We're not talking about foreign countries who got bailed out. We're talking about Americans. The best of the best of what this country offered 14 years ago.
Who put their lives on the line for us in our darkest day. Hey, John, it doesn't seem like you need luck here. God knows you've had too much experience doing this, but we're going to wish you the best of it anyway. And thank you so much for making some time for us tonight.
I'm humbled, sir. Thank you.
We're going to be right back in RFL right after this.